you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm here today to talk about the very, very serious and slightly silly topic of zombies. Now, where do I get this expertise? Well, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Theories of International Politics and Zombies. That book asked the question, what would different paradigms of international relations predict would happen if, in fact, the dead rose from the grave and tried to feast upon the living? Now, the purpose of this book was not really to talk about zombies, it was to talk about theories of world politics. It was to sort of provide an easy and accessible way for your average student who knows a lot more about zombies than they do about, let's say, realpolitik, to understand the way the world works. Really, in some ways, the zombies were kind of an accident. I was riding the sort of pop cultural wave. It was obvious that zombies seemed to be hot, so I therefore decided to use them. And also, let's face it, the title of anything, when you add "and zombies," makes it more awesome. So I've published the book, and the book's done pretty well. It's been adopted for a lot of courses, and if any of you had to read it, all I can say is I'm sorry. But there was a side benefit that I didn't anticipate, which is I suddenly became a zombie expert. I had to do the research. I had to watch all the zombie movies, read all the zombie books, and so on and so forth. And as a result, I got interviewed a lot by newspaper columnists, reporters, documentary filmmakers who were doing projects about zombies and would want to, someone to say, well, what would happen if this would sort of potentially occur? And the first ones that I did were a lot of fun. There was one that the History Channel did, which really was quite interesting. It took a look at the sort of history of zombies as a myth in various cultures, and also had the right amount of whimsy. It didn't take itself all that seriously. Now, that's all very well and good. The reason I'm here today is that having continued to do these kinds of interviews, I've noticed that over the last year, the questions I've gotten and the quality of the documentaries has changed somewhat. So last year, in December of 2012, the Discovery Channel did a zombie documentary called Zombie Apocalypse, timed to be aired with, by the way, the date of the Mayan apocalypse itself. And I noticed that as I was doing that interview, I got one of those uncomfortable feelings like, they're taking this way too seriously. So they kept asking me about an attack that occurred in Miami. You might be familiar with this, in May of 2012, where one guy bit another guy's face off. And, that was fine. It led to some interesting searches about zombie apocalypse, but clearly the makers of this documentary wanted to know whether I really thought this was a zombie, and more importantly, whether the government was covering it up. So something has changed. Yes, zombies are fun, we can laugh at them, but the tenor of the discourse on it has actually focused a little more on the apocalypse and a little less on the zombies. And the question I want to ask today is, why is that the case? Why are we suddenly concerned about this? Okay, first, we've got to define our terms. I'm a political scientist, that's what we do. Now, there's a lot of variation in the way we think about zombies. Some zombies are fast, some zombies are slow. I'm not even going to touch that debate, okay? But basically, there are three properties that all zombies would appear to hold that we have to care about. All right, the first is, in order to kill the zombie, you've got to get the brain, okay? You take a limb off, they're still going to come at you. You knock out the torso, it looks cool, but it doesn't change anything, they're still going to come after you. They have to go at the brain. You've got to take them out at the brain. The second thing you have to be concerned about is that all zombies care about, what is a zombie preference? All zombies want to do is eat live human flesh. They will accept no substitutes. All right? Zombies are not interested in eating other zombies because that's just gross. And finally, the third reason, and this is really part of why zombies are seen as so scary, is that if you are bitten by a zombie, there is a 100% chance that you will become a zombie. All right? Even the most virulent pathogens that we think about in today's world, like the Ebola virus or HIV, have an actual infection rate of less than 50%. So anything out there that would actually have a 100% infection rate would, without question, inspire a great amount of fear. So that's understandable. Another source of fear is the fact that zombies reside in what's called the uncanny valley. Now, the uncanny valley is a phenomenon that, interestingly enough, both robotics makers and animators have discovered when they've tried to make their creations more and more human-like. Generally speaking, we in the audience, if we see more human-like robots or more human-like animations, tend to identify or empathize more with those characters. That's the good part. However, when they become a little too lifelike, not quite lifelike, but very, very close, we suddenly feel this instant sense of revulsion for some reason. It's just the way we're hardwired. And sure enough, if you'll notice behind me, at the bottom of that uncanny valley is, of course, the zombie. So as a result, zombies provoke a fair amount of fear. But there's another ring that's going on, and it might be why we're talking about zombies now, which is in some ways, zombies represent the kind of protean threat that we think about in today's world politics. It's tough to define, it seems tough to contain, and it's very hard to get a grip on exactly how we can deal with this sort of structural problem. So in that sense, zombies represent an outstanding sort of stalking horse for these other threats that we can't talk about, or we're scared to talk about directly, or even frustrated. And indeed, to some extent, zombies represent what former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld referred to as the unknown unknowns in world politics. Any sort of theory or fear or uncertainty we have, we just assign it and think about it to zombies. And indeed, there's some evidence for this. There's a modest statistical correlation between the production of zombie movies and the incidences of war, recession, or epidemics. And indeed, we shouldn't be surprised, therefore, to learn that since the September 11th terrorist attacks, between 1/3 and 1/2 of all zombie movies have been made just in pretty much the past 12 years alone. And furthermore, it's clearly zombies, rather than some other paranormal threat, that we seem to be attaching this to. So if you take a look behind me, the blue line is Google Trends search of people interested in zombies. The red line is vampires. And as you can see, particularly with the start of the 2008 financial crisis and the Great Recession, zombies have really taken off. Vampires, not so much. Part of this might be that the way the vampire narrative has evolved has made it less of a threat. Indeed, based on recent literary tropes, vampires survive, thrive, and nay, even glitter in the world's finest high schools. Zombies, not so much. Zombies remain the truly transgressive threat that we have to be concerned about. So as a result, because we're scared of zombies, and because we're scared of a lot of things that we then wind up attaching to zombies, a lot of policy entrepreneurs, idea entrepreneurs, and even public agencies have latched on to the zombie meme as a way to try to capture the attention of an increasingly scattered public. So certainly op-ed writers have done this. Indeed, apparently at the New York Times, it's required that you must at least write one op-ed column, let's say every month, with zombies in the title. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to stay there for that long. But it's not just op-ed columnists. It's also academics. You're starting to see serious scholarship into the origins of the zombie myth and what it means for our larger popular culture. I'm certainly guilty of taking the zombie trope and trying to apply it to international relations. But I'm hardly the only subfield that has done this. Lots of other fields of thought have also applied this. But it's not just academics or, opinion columnists. It's also large multinational corporations, and not the umbrella corporation either. All right? So REI, for example, is a way of trying to latch on to the zombie pop culture wave. Says, if you're really worried about a zombie apocalypse, here are these 13 excellent products that you must buy in order to protect yourself. Even professions like architecture have held competitions for the best zombie-proof house that you can build. And anytime anyone does one of these things, of course, it gathers a lot of news headlines and a lot of media attention, which is the goal sometimes. But truthfully, oddly enough, without question, the greatest success that we can point to is not by any private actor, but rather by the government, particularly the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. Now, 2 years ago, the CDC on its blog wrote a post saying, well, what would the CDC do if, in fact, the dead should rise upon the grave and feast upon the entrails of the living? And the CDC appropriately did this tongue-in-cheek and said, don't worry, we've got it, and you'd have to prepare the same way you would prepare for a lot of other emergencies. This post immediately went viral, and within 2 hours, the web traffic was so large, the CDC's web server crashed. The CDC, recognizing a good thing when it got it, decided to then come out actually with a comic book based on the zombie apocalypse. And again, it was very clever, because the point they were trying to make is that the way you should prepare for a zombie apocalypse is pretty much the same way you should prepare for any other kind of natural disaster or pandemic. Make sure you have plenty of food. Make sure you have plenty of water, that you have a safe place to hide in. Less shotguns perhaps, but other than that, pretty much the same. And furthermore, other organizations and governments have taken advantage of this and sort of hopped on the zombie bandwagon as well. The US Department of Homeland Security has done zombie emergency preparedness drills. The provinces of both Quebec and British Columbia in Canada have also done similar things. So clearly, the zombie metaphor has been embraced by a lot of actors as a way of trying to pursue their own particular policy agendas. Now, this is all to the good, all right? In some ways, doing this, causes people to actually pay attention where they otherwise might not. All right? Shockingly, the web traffic for the other CDC blog entry is not as large as the zombie one. All right? Furthermore, the advantage of talking about zombies, and I speak this here as a professor, is that it makes it easier to explain things. Your average 18-year-old knows pretty much what happens when you talk about zombies. They might not understand realism or social constructivism or other abstract theories nearly as well. So this is a pedagogically useful way of doing things. Furthermore, when done right, introducing pop culture metaphors and analogies allows for a fair amount of creativity. The moment you introduce zombies, everyone knows, wow, there really are no rules if we talk about this scenario. Let's introduce other things. Wolfmen, for example. All right? So it allows for much more creativity. And then finally, there's the aspect of genre. The great thing about genre, both the sci-fi and horror genres, in some ways they exist in no small part because they allow us to tackle issues that are far more depressing or frightening to address head-on. So as a result, one of the utilities of genre is that we can talk about things without really talking about things. Now that's all the good, and that's great to see the sort of popular uses of the zombie metaphor. But I do want to point out that there's also some bad associated with it. And there's two things in particular, maybe two and a half. The first is that, believe it or not, beliefs in the paranormal or beliefs in conspiracies have a viral quality to them, much like the zombie virus. If you surround yourself with people who believe in zombies, pretty soon you too will also believe in zombies. You laugh, there's actually research about this. If you surround yourself with people who believe in conspiracies, pretty soon you too will also start thinking conspiratorially. So as a result, this introduction of the zombie, meme in popular culture more generally might actually cause more people to think that a zombie might actually exist, and as a result cause them to behave in a much more fearful manner. But truthfully, the really bad problem is analogical reasoning. Deep down, we all have monkey brains. And therefore, whenever we encounter something new, our first instinct is to try to pair it with something old, something that we already know. So, is the invasion of Iraq going to be another Vietnam? Is Barack Obama another FDR or another Jimmy Carter? We always try to compare something new with something old. And the idea behind analogical reasoning is the notion that if enough things look similar in terms of the new compared to the old, then clearly the same outcome will take place. But this is a problem with the zombie meme in particular, because in this case, one of the issues is the zombie meme is incredibly homogeneous. I've had to watch a lot of zombie movies. I've had to read a lot of zombie books. And almost all of them follow the exact same narrative trope. In minute 1, you introduce the living dead, and by minute 10, you are living in a post-apocalyptic hellscape. And this is a problem, because if people really do start thinking apocalyptically, or if people start thinking there are these other threats that could be like a zombie apocalypse, the problem is that then they might actually believe the analogy, which means they think that humanity can't cope with these other threats, and that in fact we are inevitably destined to live in a post-apocalyptic hellscape. And this is a problem because of the power of belief. If we live in a society where we actually don't have faith in civil society or in government institutions or in our leaders to actually be able to handle these kinds of emergencies, then believing that we're going to live in the apocalypse means eventually we actually do live in the apocalypse. And as a result, we wind up living in an extremely constrained, defined universe. And it actually underestimates the originality that human beings and the adaptability of human beings to cope with new situations. Human beings are awesome. We invented duct tape. All right? We can cope with the living dead, no problem. And indeed, there's a reason why you often get to the post-apocalyptic hellscape at minute 10. It's because very often whoever created the zombie story doesn't know actually how that would happen. So the problem is that we need different narratives out there. We don't need to diminish the zombie as a threat, but rather we need to appreciate our own ability to adapt to new circumstances. So as a result, my recommendation for the cure is we need new narratives. Narratives that recognize the threat posed by the living dead and, of course, all of the other related threats that are often lumped in with the zombie apocalypse. But nevertheless, also appreciate humanity's ability to adapt to new circumstances, surmount them, and reassert order in society. And so I will close on that optimistic note. Thank you very much.